Okay, it's Friday, October 7th, and we are having a leadership retreat here in Bend, Oregon. I'm standing here next to my amazing friend Brenda that I've not even known a year. What? Okay,
A little more than a
year. And so anyways, we've become fast friends, and I want her to introduce to those of you that are watching her background and what we're about to demonstrate to these lovely leaders that have been so amazing to the ministry for the last few years. But we're always here to try to help them to understand the grief and the trauma. And then, you know, meeting Brenda has been just such an additional blessing, supplement, so many things, adding laughter and whatnot. So today, the Holy Spirit just once again shown that she's in the middle of studying, which I won't take your thunder, is studying something that I have been learning off to the side in a different way. We're having this conversation today, and so here we are. But before we start that, what's going on in your life? What's happening in 11 weeks?
In 11 weeks, yeah. So I'm currently, is it 11 weeks? No,
Yeah.
it's 9.
Oh, but who's counting?
Yeah, who's counting?
Yeah.
So in 9 weeks, I'm currently finishing up my degree at Liberty University in Christian counseling and theology. And so the class that I'm in right now, and I've been studying this thing too, it's called integration. And I first got introduced to it through a counseling process that I was going through. And it's more, I was seeing a Christian counselor, and he was helping me through a time in my life, but then I ended up going through a training with him because I was so drawn to what he was doing. And he said, you would be so good at this. And it kind of, you know, just reaffirmed the schooling that I was doing, and not only that, but the direction that I'm going to go with my Christian counseling. And so this last class I have right now is counseling for children. And when I opened up my textbook, I really didn't know what it was going to be. It's a required class, and the first chapter I started reading, and it's all about integration. I thought, well, there's no surprise there, really. It is, yeah, totally a Holy Spirit thing, which is why we're here today to kind of share this with you guys, because it is it's something that I think we all suffer, or most people suffer from these fractures or these splits in our spirit, and they're caused from trauma. It can be neglect too, but any kind of trauma or neglect. A lot of times it happens when you're, you know, in your younger years, in your childhood, but it can happen all through life too. And so I don't know how much further I want to go right now. Should we go and demonstrate, and then?
I think, well,
Does that make sense? What I've said so far,
So-
at least?
Very much so.
Okay.
and so some of those terms, you guys familiar with
If you could elaborate a little more on what integration really is.
Yeah, and so in the world of psychology, integration is, you know, we have, our brains are pretty separate. So we have like the right side of our brain and the left side of our brain, just to make it really simple. And the right side of our brain is more emotion. It's where our fight or flight happens when you get in a car wreck or fear happens, or you're getting chased by a bear and you react really quickly. And the left side of the brain is more our logical side of the brain, where we form our sentences, where we think things through, and make more of an informed decision before we act or speak. But the thing is that they don't really work together. And so integration is a process of, it's really called neuroplasticity, where,
Stay with us.
yeah, sorry.
Look at Grace. Don't look at us like that.
Are you with me, Grace?
Neuroplasticity. I'm familiar. Yeah.
Okay, it's just basically just what it's saying is that there's hope. So if we have a trauma in childhood and we hold a memory in a certain way, we're not stuck. They're finding out now, there's more recent research now that shows that there are things we can do so that the brain will hold that memory differently. Yeah, and so really, when you think about it, I was talking to Jackie about this earlier, being created in the image of God, right? In the perfect image of God, it should be no surprise to us that we're not stuck, that there's always hope. And so God is using people and giving them this technology and this new information.
And so if you think about, we have the horses out here, and a lot of times I've talked about they're always in the fight or flight, right? So the horses pretty much always are in that. That's their means of defense. So when something happens, they immediately go into that side of the brain that is just run. So as a horseback rider, in order to get them back into their logical part of their brain, sometimes I have to go like this. It's part of the demonstration.
Yeah.
I have to kind of tap them on the head so they snap out of that and they go into their logical part. Like, buddy, that's a tree. We've already passed that tree.
Right.
It's nothing scary. So, and their brains don't necessarily obviously work like ours
No.
do, where their left and their right brain connect.
Right.
So, and it is a protective
Because
mechanism.
they're prey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for us, it's also protective because when we are in the fight or flight, like back in the day when you say you're running from a bear or something
Right.
like that, but we were in it and then we were out of it. Nowadays, it seems like we can't get out of it. We're always in it. So hence, so I think, did you
Brings
start?
us to this.
I think you started with the adult one first, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
you're talking about,
And
So-
so we'll do this, and then we can talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
it too.
so this is an adult, right? And this is trauma, okay? Just for visual purposes. So, we go through life and, we have a little bit of trauma or whatever. And if we're in a good place, it's like, we have area that we can learn to cope with it, right? But then we get some more trauma and, okay, hopefully we have had some time to be able to process it. Am I doing this right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, but sometimes it's like we just get so much trauma. I think I'm gonna need more water, Brenda.
Okay. No, you're good. Because we'll just pour it back in.
Okay, so anyway, and then it's like, okay, maybe you get to this point and then you're like, oh, okay, I can still manage this. There's still some space to be able to have some coping. Well then, so say the landslide happens, okay? So now we're talking like, where's the trauma? Where does the trauma get to go, right? It's gotta go elsewhere. It's just, there's none. So this is like in a state of complete fight or flight right here. It's like you've got to have help. And so it overflows. So like, you wanna just bring some more water? Cause
Oh, okay. I was just gonna grab a towel.
we'll do some more.
Just in case.
Just in case what? Okay, so there's the adult, right? So, and then as a child, we have smaller capacity because our brains aren't fully developed yet, and we have a little bit of water. So as a child, you get some of the trauma, right? And then they're like, okay, and they're kids, and they don't really have that place. And then, they get a little bit more trauma.
Hold it over the pan.
Yeah, here.
No, over here.
Okay, here. This is really funny.
Here goes that
Can
smoke
you tell
on
this
the
is the
towel.
first time we've done this?
We did
Okay,
not practice.
So, well, the guy was pretty messy on the video. So then we get a little bit more trauma, and then the kid's like, okay, but then now imagine a child that is in a, heaven forbid, like daycare, and every day, they're just gonna keep being given something that's torture, whether it's sexual abuse, right? It's just gonna keep overflowing, right? The child doesn't know what to do with this, so it's just gonna be, and so now what? So now we can pour this back, right? Okay. Okay, well, this is part 2 of it. So now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so, but now, this is the part where I can talk about this part, right?
Yeah, and the little separate.
So now this is like, say, part is like inside of your brain, right? And there's all these different parts that, like Brenda was talking about, in your brain, right? And so the trauma is kind of like, it's in different parts. Well, so then those parts end up having to go into these little parts like this, and we call these, Brenda,
Fractures,
or alters,
splits, or alters.
right?
You probably maybe you've heard the term DID, dissociative identity disorder, which is basically it's a part of your soul fractures off and holds that memory. Whatever happened that caused that memory.
So, and it could be like a situation to where they're trying to do their job to help us cope. So
Right.
these are like the good guys. They're helping us cope.
Yes.
So, but if somebody I guess we're giving an example of what happened earlier, but, so say somebody comes up to you and, let's see, I'm trying to use something, oh, okay, my mom. I was telling Brenda earlier, so my mom, most of you guys know my mom attempted suicide when I was 17, right? So she had found out my dad was having an affair, so it's a normal school morning, my dad walked out after this big fight, I'm in my room and I heard somebody jump in the pool. As it turns out, my mom was the one that jumped into the pool, and I looked outside, I went running down the stairs, pulled her out, came out, whatever, looked at my dad after we finally came back in, trying to, come on mom, whatever, and she coughed up and she started crying. It seemed like she never stopped, like for weeks. She went in her room for almost, I don't know how long it was, and she didn't want to have anything to do with the world. So my mom had asked me to close all the blinds in the house, especially in her rooms, to where it was absolutely, thank you, pitch dark in her room. Couldn't see what was happening out in the world, right? So I would come in the bedroom and I'm like checking on her. Now my brother and sister are 6 and whatever they were younger than me. And I guess I was taking on this role of taking care of them. But every time I go in my mom's room, this is closed, right? And then she'd go in the bathroom and now I'm like, oh my gosh, she's gonna try to do it again. So I'm in there and I'm just like, Mom, what are you doing there? Leave me alone, leave me alone. The room's dark, right? So now, like this right now, I processed through this, but this is a trigger that if I hadn't worked through this, okay, right? If I hadn't worked through this, I would, every time I go in a room, I'd be like, like this. And I come in there and I have to pull this open and be like, oh my gosh, like it wasn't that bad, but I noticed it, okay? So, but I had counseling and I had somebody talk to me and say, Jackie, your mom is in heaven with Jesus now. She's now okay. Your mom was going through a time. The blinds are okay. The blinds are there to make it dark. Okay? Let me take this a step further. I didn't even tell you this, is that Randy used a knife. Okay? To this day, I go in the kitchen and I don't like to work with knives. And here's what my mind thinks. And my sons, God bless them, my sons didn't want to use a knife either because they're thinking their wives or somebody's going to think they're going to do something with that knife. So, and it's just a thing. So now I've said every time I touch that knife, it's a thing with me. I know I'm not going to do anything with that knife, but Satan's certainly trying to play havoc with me with it, like, yeah, that's what your son used, whatever. I have been told, Jackie, and Marseille too, this is a kitchen tool. This is just to be used in a kitchen. It was used as a weapon satanically or demonically or whatever it was, but this is just a tool. He could have, anybody could have picked up a pepper shaker and used it as that. It's just pepper.
Right.
Separating it.
So what she's talking about, what she's just described is integration. So you've taken the memory that's held and formed in the right side of the brain and formed the neurons fire together, which forms a new pathway, and you're bringing that reason and logic into the memory so that you can hold it in a new way.
So the left brain and the right brain now are communicating
Yes.
rather than compartmentalizing.
Yes.
Very good.
Yeah.
So you guys understand? So like if you continued to go through your life, and there's a lot of people, right? And they have trauma, and some of it's constant verbal, physical abuse, whatever, and it's like it gets to this point, and it's just going to overflow. Now, Brenda has actually seen, and now I'm more aware of seeing people that now all of this trauma has found storage, right, in their brain, but they haven't, they've developed these altars, right? And so you're sitting next to somebody, she's like, I saw him in Las Vegas.
Last week, this was an extreme example.
Extreme example,
Yeah.
but tell them what you saw.
I mean, so we were just at a dinner table. It was at a conference, and a woman that I had just met sat there, and she was mouthing like she was talking, but no words were coming out. But she wasn't talking to any of us. She had this constant. What is happening is she has altars, and there's a constant chatter going on in her brain, And so she's participating in that noise that's happening up here constantly. She was rolling her eyes and doing all kinds of different gestures. And so, yeah, those are altars. And I think that it's such a common thing. And I think most people think that that noise in your brain is normal, but it's not supposed to be like that. And so, like Jackie was describing here too, those memories, when this happened with Jackie's mom. How old were you, Jackie?
17.
Yeah, so at 17, that fracture happened. And so the memory's held by a 17-year-old girl, not a, how old are you, Jackie?
16!
How old is she?
Just ask Grace.
How old am I, Grace? How old am I?
How old is she, Grace? Now that she's...
I somehow 66.
Little side joke. Anyway, so what happens, like Jackie just said, so that memory is held by a 17-year-old girl, which is a coping mechanism, right? It kind of is holding that memory so that Jackie doesn't have to deal with it. And then somebody comes in and closes the blind and it triggers that memory. Now that part comes forward and takes over. And that's who's talking, that's who's acting, whatever's coming out is coming from that 17-year-old girl. It also, I mean, in even more extreme cases, and really common actually, is the younger kids. We have, most people have childhood trauma, so ages 0 to 10. You know, so this split might be a 3-year-old. So at however old Jackie is, I don't know that she's 60. That can't be true.
17.
17. It doesn't work for her well, right? To be in a conversation with somebody, she gets triggered, and all of a sudden there's a 3-year-old girl who's come up front and taken over the conversation.
And you can see that sometimes
You can see
with
it happen.
people, like, they could, like, for example, so Brenda has a friend that was like really talking and very confident, right? And then all of a sudden somebody said something to him, and he went into this,
Just cowered and then walked away like a little boy. Just
like something that somebody said just triggered that, and then off he went. But before, boy, his other, you know, coping mechanism was just like, yeah, he's all that and a bag of chips and
exactly. No, that's exactly right.
yeah, and then and whatever he was doing, and it's like then he goes into that in just a second because he hasn't worked through that part. So people are all walking around, and then it sounds really crazy, but people were put in. There's a lot of bipolar that is misdiagnosed, schizophrenia, but really what's happening is this, and there's a cure, because first of all, we know that Jesus is gonna given us the science behind this, right? To be able to figure this out, say, let's bring all these altars together and let's tell them, like, okay, that's okay.
Lines are
We don't need you anymore.
Right.
We've got Jesus. Jesus, come in, fix that part. Okay, say it's like raped, okay? And it's like, okay, that was a situation. Not all men are like that. Whatever, something's happened, and Jesus is now taken over. We don't need that. So now those two are quiet. They're out of the game. Their job is done. And we keep going into all the different ones. Some people, like she says, there's like 40 of these.
Sometimes,
There's so many, and some of them are real obvious, and some of them are not. But God gave us these coping mechanisms, right? But He wanted you to go to His Word so that you could sort through this with Him and get rid of them, because otherwise this devil wants us to stay stuck.
And we're not stuck
Yeah,
because
stay
we're
stuck
created in
in
the
it.
image of God.
Because we need, keep going,
Where are you going?
right here, because you brought up the scripture
Oh
today.
yeah, we should tie it back to this. But I also just, as you're pulling that up, so Isaiah 61 really describes exactly what we're talking about, and that's what she's looking for now. But the other thing to think about too is that 3-year-old child that is holding that memory isn't probably saved, or wasn't saved, didn't know Jesus when that happened. Because we as adults make our decision to follow Jesus, right? It doesn't happen when we're 3-year-olds. So they're saying, well, I don't know if I can leave you, because where was Jesus when that happened? And they're not saved. So we've got to introduce, that part to Jesus.
Yeah.
And integration happens.
And I think I could really, like with Noah, I keep using Noah as an example. So when all this happened, Noah, didn't really know Jesus. Like, he heard his parents talking about him and Noah and everything, but he didn't really know him. So now he keeps saying to his mom, like, I don't know Jesus. I'm probably not really saved, Mom. And he's also got his altars that now, imagine, what his are. And I was just sharing with him about how he felt like he was mad because Marseille got married, and he was supposed to be the one to take over and save the family now that his daddy's not here. So he's got this huge, he's got so much going on inside of him, and yeah, poor baby. And I'm like thinking, gosh, so tell him about the prayer, the deliverance prayer. Then that's what
Isaiah 61.
Okay,
Is that what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
So Isaiah 61, I mean, this was prophesied by Isaiah, right? That and
Can you read it?
Yeah, go ahead and read it.
So the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor.
Amen.
And it goes on. So the funny thing was, Brenda's like, you gotta read Isaiah 61. I was like, oh, Isaiah 61. It's like, I don't have Bible memorized. So I went and I looked today, and I have made notes in Isaiah 61 saying,
This all happened today.
so it's like
Change your plan.
September 8th in 2014, I wrote this proclaiming 61, 1 through 3 as my ministry moves forward to shining a light into the dens of our hearts that need healing. That ministry was the trail angels during the time. Before the landslide happened, right? But I had said, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because the Lord has anointed me, all of us, right? Not just me, has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom from the captives. I look at them, right?
Yeah.
And release from the darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor.
And Jesus, I don't know if you all know this scripture, stood on a mountaintop and unrolled this scroll and read it. And so this is really Jesus saying, the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me. And the part that really stands out for me here is, He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. So, yes, all the fractures
Binds up.
to make us whole.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So is that where, like, the random thoughts of something in the past just come into your mind, and they're the altars?
It's possible.
Okay.
I would say it's possible.
I would say if it's like, if it's altering your lifestyle, if that's, you know what I mean? Like, to where it's putting you into a place of fear, constant fear, and that's not of the Lord, and it's you're making decisions based off of that fear, things like that. Or if you find, what it's like being in a panic attack, right? And you're like, so you stop and say, Lord, why is this stirring things up in me right now? What is it needs to be worked? Hence, I was telling him about doing the heart assessment,
Oh yeah.
which brings all this stuff up.
If you have a lot of noise up here, and you just think, like, I'm thinking about lots of different things all the time.
Not your grocery list necessarily, right? Just
No, not your grocery list. Maybe it's not your to-do list, but
yeah.
other things are just constantly. It's it's a chitter chatter constant in your head, and it happens, where an altar will come forward, and you may not really be aware of it either. Probably, you're not really. Most people, I don't think, are aware, but some people are. In more extreme cases, I would say. But those people sometimes still don't remember. They have no memory of what happened when that altar was forward and had taken over.
I think if there's an awareness about this now, you'll start to recognize it.
Yeah.
So say, for instance, too, my friend Anita that was here all of last summer, and we were on a hike, and she, and I was recognizing, not even knowing at the time, it was like an altar for her, but we were going on this hike, and she goes in the beginning, I only want to go for an hour hike. And I was like, okay, and I've never, like, if I told Brenda we're going on an hour hike, it'd be like, okay. And if we went an hour and 10 minutes, she's not going to be upset about it, right? She's going to go, okay, let's go more, right? So we were on the trail, and then she knew that we had to go back up this hill to go out of the park. And we get to the bridge, and she goes, hey, I told you I had an hour hike in me, right? And it was just like, really, like, all of a sudden, something triggered in her.
You've noticed it.
And then I must have had something trigger me, like I was being scolded, probably from my dad or something, right? To where then I lashed back at her, and I'm like, are you kidding me right now?
Right, and then later you're like, what just happened?
Yeah, and then she goes, geez, you went from 0 to 60, and I went, but wait a minute, we're on a hike. Like I said, but then I came back to her and I said, look, you are saying that because you know we got to climb out that hill. So all of a sudden it's easier for you to point the finger at me because of something that you're feeling insecure about. So here I am, like we're in this trail, and we're both got Italian in us, I'm just saying. And so we're having this discussion, and her friend is there, and she's like, okay. But I'm like, I recognize when somebody is in that place to where that's not normal for them. And it's like, that's not okay. And I did go from 0 to 60. I didn't get mad, but I came back at her with what I knew was going on, and she didn't like that. So I just pointed it out to her. So and she goes, yeah, darn right. I'm thinking about that hill. And I said, so why do you have to get mad at me? I said, if we go an hour and 15 minutes, that shouldn't be upsetting to you. And so anyway, later, of course, we've been friends, like me and Kathy. I've known her for over 30 years. So it never turns into a heated issue. We just talk like that. But something hit her, and then we later discuss it. Something hit me. So you may notice that if you're speaking to your spouse, and all of a sudden something comes up and a trigger comes up, and then you're like, wait a minute, why? I know I could give you 100 of them with me and with my ex, right? Without ever making him look bad. It was just that he did not like confrontation. And confrontation to him was just having like a conversation about, hey, what was going on, like when we were in the car with the kids. And I'm like, that's kind of bad to sit there and do that and to the kids while we're not supposed to disagree about disciplining, right? And then he would just stand there. I'm like, you're not going to say anything? And he's like, well, I'm not going to say anything because I'm not going to get a word in edgewise. And I go, I just want a word, So, but his dad was an alcoholic, and his dad at the table took over the entire conversation.
Sorry, I'm just standing from.
That's
you're
good.
I'll leave crap.
Took over the conversation at dinner time, never allowing anybody to speak, right? And so they were taught not to talk.
Right.
So anytime somebody's voice escalated, he shuts down. Just completely shuts down. And that's not, every marriage has to have, not confrontation, but conversations and communication.
Sure.
So you can explain what's going on. But if the other person just shuts off, that is actually a form of abuse. It is also a form of argument. Because it's not fair to the other person. Wait a minute, you need to give me an explanation as to why that you're feeling that way. It's a simple question. So you'll hear these things all the time, and it doesn't be like, you have an altar.
You guys are going to be doing that now.
I know.
Who is that talking?
But realize that all of a sudden my sister will come up, and all of a sudden her voice changes into this little girl voice.
Yeah, you will notice that sometimes a voice
Big
change
time with
or
her.
a blink of the eye, and like they kind of shake their head, and then all of a sudden you notice they're different. It might not be really extreme, but you just kind of notice what just happened. Yeah. It's
like you need to go in and you need to work on this. You need to give this back to Jesus.
Yeah.
Give it to him. No more. We don't need you. Thank you so much for helping us, but we don't need you anymore. And this one is opaque because sometimes you can't even tell what it is. Yeah. And there's demonic altars. There's like so many different types of altars and I believe in my heart of hearts that Randy had like some kind of a demonic thing that happened because of what happened to him in the military. Opened up this portal and came in and said, oh, he's questioning and he's decided to have an affair, and oh, look at him, he doesn't
I have right to you.
Yes.
I have right to you now.
Yeah, he gave up that right in that moment. So, anyways, yes, fascinating stuff. If some of you may be like, but I think even if you don't want to dive into it anymore, as long as you can remember the visual, the scripture, and everything, and recognize it to say, oh, that's what's going on with me right now. I'm okay. I just need to process through this.
Or maybe the moms in your group too, it might help explain
yes,
a lot of what's going on with them. And there's a lot of information out there on this that you can read if you just look up DID. That's probably a good search to kind of dive in a little bit more if you're interested. I think that this is something that everybody should be doing. That's how I feel about it, because we want to be whole and free with Jesus. Yeah.
So that's where the deliverance prayer comes in too.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's like, in fact, so the counselor she talked about is the one that I was like, okay, whatever, I'll go to, I got a guy. That was you got a counselor? Yeah, I got a guy. And I go there just going in because I wanted to have a man counselor because I wanted to get through my issues with men. And I thought, well, I want to hear what they have to say from a Christian perspective. So I did. Little did I know that I was going to be getting in all this and learning so much about me and
He's a
helping
wealth of
it
information.
Yes. And that he was telling me about, this whole prayer of deliverance and how that helps to get
to actually go through deliverance. Is that what you're talking
Yes,
about?
yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so he will know when you're ready to do it, and it's all biblical, so it's not like some weird
It's
something
right
out
here,
there.
Isaiah 61.
But it really just makes sense. It's really, and this would be such a typical thing that Jesus would do.
Yeah.
Simplicity in trying to demonstrate something. Just say, well, we can talk about this all day long, but at the end of the day, it's like your cup is overfilled.
Yeah.
It's
And
too
so
full.
it's gonna go,
It's
gonna
spilling
go
out.
somewhere.
And it's gonna, and then people say trauma comes out sideways. This is what it means. It's gotta go somewhere, so it stores in the brain and all these places, and your brain is so amazing. It's like, it's crazy amazing.
It is crazy amazing.
And he made
Of course,
it, so
because,
if he designed it, he's gonna give us a way to be able to fix it.
That's right. There's
Right?
always hope. Always hope.
So, anyway, does that make sense? Is that over
Love
the
that.
top? Okay. Anyways, thanks,
Thank
Brenda.
you.
That was fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well done. Very well done.
Thank you
Did
for
that help
letting
you,
us
Jackie?
try.
Did that help you understand?
Yeah.
Yeah?
It did.
Good.
And our conversation